A London-based investigative journalism nonprofit recently broke a story revealing how the Pentagon worked with a PR firm headed up by Margaret Thatcher's spin doctor to produce fake al-Qaeda videos and other propaganda during the Iraq War. Bell Pottinger is a London-based company specializing in lobbying, speech writing, search engine optimization, and other services for governments and corporations. It is known for unethical behavior, including posing as fake representatives of the Uzbek government and violating Wikipedia rules by removing negative information and replacing it with positive spin. Present and past clients include Augusto Pinochet and the Pinochet Foundation, Dutch Oil, the government of Bahrain, and Coca-Cola. Bell Pottinger's Tim Collins referred to the company's work as dark arts. He has a close connection to the inner circle of British Prime Minister David Cameron. Bell Pottinger was paid over $500 million to produce TV segments made in the style of Arabic television. According to a former employee, the company worked with the CIA and the National Security Council. The material was approved by the commander in Iraq at the time, David Petraeus. He later became the director of the CIA. The PR agency was hired soon after George W. Bush and his neocons invaded Iraq in 2003. It was initially tasked with running occupational elections, but soon switched to information and psychological operations. Lord Bell told the Sunday Times most of the money was spent on propaganda production and distribution.
So when I first started working on it, I didn't know how big a project this was. I just assumed it was news gathering. But having seen the process and worked in the process, I then realised this was a big project. And the budget was large as well for this project. It's around about 120 million a year for this project. And that's a lot of money.
Propaganda produced by the company ran the gamut of white, gray, and black psychological operations. It's disseminated by the military and the CIA, most notably through its Voice of America and the United States Information Agency at the State Department. Gray propaganda is also produced by the military and the CIA, but does not clearly identify a source. Black propaganda is deceptively attributed to another source and is associated with covert psychological operations.
For the psychological program must be constantly updated. As the people are affected by the program, so the program is affected by their changes in attitudes. A successful PSYOP program will make them perceive things from the desired viewpoint.
During the Vietnam War, the United States carried out a campaign of black propaganda against the Viet Cong called the Phoenix Program. In addition to propaganda, the military used kidnapping, jailing, interrogation, torture, and assassination as part of a false flag operation. It's estimated between 20,000 and 40,000 Vietnamese were killed during the program. The Bell Pottinger propaganda campaign took its cues from a CIA manual, Psychological Operations in Guerrilla Warfare. The manual was published when the Reagan administration trained and funded the Contras to defeat the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. The Bell Pottinger team produced scripts for Arabic soap operas that delivered propaganda messages. They also produced fake al-Qaeda videos. The videos were produced in the real player format that requires an internet connection to run. CDs were embedded with a code linking to Google Analytics, which allowed the military to track IP addresses the videos were played on. The CDs were often planted in homes raided by the military. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism broke the story after it examined U.S. Army contracting censuses, federal procurement transaction records, and reports by the Department of Defense Inspector General, in addition to Bell Pottinger's corporate filings and specialist publications on military propaganda. It backed up its research by interviewing a half-dozen former officials and contractors involved in information operations in Iraq. Prior to the Bureau of Investigative Journalism story, details about CIA propaganda in Iraq went public. For instance, in 2010, the Washington Post's security blog reported the agency's operations group had considered shooting a fake video of Saddam Hussein having sex with a teenage boy. Although the Sodom video never made it off the ground, another project did. It depicted an actor playing Osama bin Laden, sitting around a campfire, drinking alcohol, and bragging about his gay conquests. The video, however, was never released. The Rendon Group was also involved in a CIA propaganda campaign in Iraq. The secretive public relations firm assisted a number of U.S. military interventions in nations including Argentina, Colombia, Haiti, Iraq, Kosovo, Panama, and Zimbabwe. It organized and named the Iraqi National Congress, a PR front group designed to foment the overthrow of Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein. According to the award-winning investigative journalist Seymour Hersh, the Rendon Group was paid close to $100 million by the CIA for its work with the Iraqi National Congress. The Rendon Group is credited with creating the Iraqi Broadcasting Corporation that broadcast propaganda in the country. Rendon also worked with the Bush administration to spin military strikes in Afghanistan. It acted as a PR firm for the U.S.-installed leader Hamid Karzai and orchestrated the country's counter-narcotics program. At the time, Karzai's brother worked for the CIA and was a major player in Afghanistan's booming opium trade. The military also used psychological operations on members of Congress. In 2011, Michael Hastings reported for Rolling Stone that Lieutenant General William Caldwell, a three-star general in charge of training Afghan troops, illegally ordered a team of soldiers specializing in psychological operations to manipulate visiting American senators into providing more troops and funding for the war.
Well, essentially what we have here is that an information operations cell, which is a cell that by definition is trained to conduct psychological operations and military deception, was asked by Lieutenant General Caldwell and his staff to use their skills on visiting U.S. senators and other VIPs. Now, the cell, this I.O. cell, was led by a gentleman named Lieutenant Colonel Michael Holmes. Lieutenant Colonel Holmes raised objections to being asked to do this. He said, hey, I'm an I.O. cell. Information operations is only supposed to be used for foreign audiences. It's a really bad idea to be using my team because we specialize in psychological operations and whatnot to be doing this. But the pressure kept on mounting on him to focus all his efforts not on the Afghans but on Americans visiting.
The members of Congress included Senators John McCain, Joe Lieberman, Jack Reed, Al Franken, and Carl Levin, as well as Representative Steve Israel of the House Appropriations Committee, Admiral Mike Mullen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and a host of influential think tank analysts. Following his story and a less than laudatory profile of U.S. Army General Stanley McChrystal, Hastings died in a suspicious car accident. In 2008, the New York Times revealed the Pentagon used retired military officers acting as analysts at CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC to spin coverage of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Most of the analysts had ties to military contractors with vested interests in the foreign policy of the Bush administration. According to the Times, records and interviews show how the Bush administration used its control over access and information in an effort to transform the analysts into a kind of media Trojan horse, an instrument intended to shape terrorism coverage from inside the major TV and radio networks. Psychological operations conducted by the government are numerous. One of the more infamous was Operation Northwoods. In his book Body of Secrets, author James Bamford reveals secret and long-hidden documents detailing a plan approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon. Operation Northwoods called for innocent people to be shot on American streets, for boats carrying refugees fleeing Cuba to be sunk on the high seas, for a wave of violent attacks to be launched in Washington, D.C., Miami, and other American cities. The terrorism would be blamed on Fidel Castro and the Cuban government. President Kennedy rejected the plan. More recently, military personnel from the 4th Psychological Operations Group, based at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, were embedded at CNN's Atlanta headquarters. In 2000, the Dutch journalist Abe de Vries published a story showing PSYOPs personnel, soldiers, and officers worked as regular employees at CNN through the Training with Industry program. De Vries told Counterpunch the psychological program was confirmed by CNN and military personnel. Iraqis, Afghans, and members of Congress are not the only people subjected to psychological operations. In 2012, a bill was included as Amendment 114 of the Defense Authorization Act, passed in the House of Representatives. It amended the Smith-Mundt Act of 1948 and the Foreign Relations Authorization Act passed in 1987. The law allows the State Department and the Pentagon to push propaganda on the American people over television, radio, newspaper, and social media. The U.S. Information and Educational Exchange Act of 1948 forbids propaganda intended for foreign audiences to be used in the United States. The amendments, however, were little more than a formality. In the early 1950s, the CIA launched Operation Mockingbird. The secret program organized by Cord Meyer and Allen Dulles, and later led by Frank Wisner, recruited leading American journalists into a propaganda network. Wisner recruited Philip Graham of the Washington Post to run the project. Graham had worked for military intelligence during the Second World War. In addition to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, the Chicago Daily News, and other influential publications participated in the project. The CIA paid some of the journalists through its Office of Policy Coordination, a covert psychological operations and paramilitary action organization folded into the CIA in 1951. Money for the project came from the Marshall Plan, a program intended to rebuild Europe after the war. In addition to feeding propaganda to the establishment media, Operation Mockingbird restricted news on CIA plots to overthrow the governments of Iran and Guatemala. The Church Committee, chaired by Senator Frank Church, in the 1970s revealed details about Operation Mockingbird that remained hidden up until that time.
I thought that it was a matter of real concern that planted stories intended to serve a national purpose abroad came home and were circulated here and believed here, because this would mean that the CIA could manipulate the news in the United States by channeling it through some foreign country. And we're looking at that very carefully.
In 1999, during the wrongful death lawsuit of Lloyd Jowers and co-conspirators in the assassination of Martin Luther King, attorney William Schaap described the reach of Operation Mockingbird.
But most people didn't realize the extent of the intelligence media organization is fairly incredible. They sort of brag about it. When you read the books about the history of the CIA, one of the heroes was the first man in charge of media operations, a man named Frank Wisner, and they referred to his organization as the Mighty Wurlitzer. And there's this image of this guy sitting at one of those giant organs, you know, with 17 keyboards, and you're playing this sort of like the Phantom of the Opera in that scene. And there was the guy running the CIA media operations all around the world. And he really was, because every single city of any size on Earth, he had some employee who was supposedly worked for a newspaper or a magazine or a radio station or a wire service. And they could get stories anywhere.
Schaap said about a third of the CIA's budget went into media secret propaganda operations. He estimated the amount at close to $1 billion a year. In 1976, following the revelations of the Church Committee, the CIA announced new guidelines restricting the relationship between the agency and the media. By this time, however, the connections between the national security state and the establishment media were hardwired, and the guidelines were more or less meaningless. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism revelations shed new light on a number of Osama bin Laden videos released during the Bush years. Although video and terrorism experts routinely dismissed videos and audio tapes as fakes, the government and the establishment media portrayed them as legitimate. An early video allegedly shows the Saudi confessing to orchestrating the 9/11 attacks, while others are less specific and left open to interpretation by translators and news reporters reading from government scripts. Despite ample evidence of fakery and manipulation, the media routinely feigns ignorance. The videos provide imagery for a narrative that keeps the manufactured war on terror alive. Many of the videos were released by the Intel Center, a Virginia-based private contractor that works for the military, law enforcement, and intelligence agencies. iDefense also released videos. The company is comprised of long-serving ex-military intelligence officials, such as senior military PSYOP intelligence officer Jim Melnick, who served 16 years in the U.S. Army and the Defense Intelligence Agency in psychological operations. Melnick worked directly with former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism article exposes covert psychological warfare waged against not only the people of Iraq, but the world at large, including and importantly the people of America. The establishment media works in concert with the national security state and the military to convey in a positive light the foreign policy narrative of the global elite, distort the truth about its subterfuge and war crimes, and build consensus for its predatory agenda.